Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt. Today I want to talk about learning grammar and language learning and how to best approach that, because I think a lot of people, they struggle with this idea, right? Like, what do you do? How do you best approach grammar? Because there's just so many different ways and opinions out there on how to do this, right? On one end of the spectrum, you have people that are very kind of grammar focused, right? Think school system. This is just like a heavy focus on accuracy, on memorizing a bunch of tables. And then on the other end, you have people that advocate no grammar at all or very little grammar. And the way that I like to think about things is kind of a middle of the road approach, right? I think that grammar can be helpful and useful in your language learning, but by no means should it be your primary focus or emphasis. So let's talk about grammar a little bit. The thing about grammar is that I think it's really important to be exposed to the main ideas of the grammar of whatever language you're learning, right? And this is especially relevant when you're reading and listening, because if you're exposed to these grammar concepts at least once, what you'll find is that it'll help you to just better comprehend that material, but also it'll act as kind of this internal review of slowly learning the grammar over time, right? I don't think of grammar as this thing that you need to rush to finish. I think of it as this gradual process that you slowly, over time, build up until it becomes very natural, right? I don't see this huge rush with it. But if you're not at least exposed to these ideas once, it's going to be very tough to just know what they are when you encounter them in other aspects of the language learning process. So one of the first things that I like to do is just be exposed or aware of the main grammar concepts in the language that you're learning. So for example, that's like, how do you speak in the present tense, the future, the past? Is there a weird word order with the language that you're learning? Things like that are really important, because then when you're listening or reading in the language, you'll see that idea, right? You'll be exposed to it and you'll at least be able to recognize it. Maybe not fully, but you'll at least be able to see it. Now, a lot of people will then kind of go back with a counter argument of, hey, listen, what about kids? They don't read grammar books and they become fluent in the language, so why do I need to review some of these grammar explanations? And although I think that's a fair point, I think you have to understand that kids have the advantage of time and massive exposure on their side, right? So for example, you have if a kid's learning their first language, they're just constantly absorbing new material, right? They're slowly building those connections. And with enough hours, they'll recognize that, hey, this word is irregular and this is how it's pronounced, or this is how you communicate in the past. As an adult, you don't really have that time advantage, right? You're working, you're doing other things. But you have the advantage of being able to consult other resources that the kid doesn't, right? You have a higher ability to read in your native language, and so you can use that to, learn foreign languages quicker. So, for example, if you're able to just read, how does the future tense roughly work, right? Now you have a leg up of noticing that as you go about your language learning process. Does that mean that you're going to internalize the future tense? Not necessarily. It doesn't even necessarily mean you're going to just know it by heart, but you have that exposure at least for the first time, right? And over time, that grammar explanation or that ending is slowly going to be internalized into your language learning reflex. So in terms of memorizing things, I think that there's certain things that are worth memorizing, right? I think of these as the high value, high ticket items that you're going to see again and again, right? Think present tense, future tense, past tense, right? Things you're going to see again and again, no matter what. And it's almost best to just suck it up and really just memorize some of that stuff, or be very familiar with it such that it really helps you to enjoy or at least process other aspects of the language, right? Whether it's when you're reading, listening, or speaking, or whatever, right? Now, your time might not be best spent on memorizing every single irregular verb, because there's a lot of verbs and you might not see them a lot, but you probably will see word order again and again. You probably will see present tense. Things like that I think are really well worth memorizing over time. And what you'll find is that even if you do memorize a bunch of things with grammar, you won't necessarily completely internalize it all. You won't be able to have it on command immediately. So you can memorize and know like a declension table by heart, but when you listen to that in context, when you're listening to a podcast or a movie, or you're reading something, you might not immediately remember the table that you memorized. You might not process that immediately. It might take you 2 or 3 seconds. And that's where the exposure part of the process comes in, where you slowly need to be just kind of exposed to those concepts in practice again and again and again, right? It's seeing that word order when you're listening to a podcast or reading again and again that helps you to slowly build that into your kind of subconscious, where then you can just output complicated word order immediately, or listen to it in a podcast and you process it immediately, right? Even though you know how it works and you know all the rules of how it processes, like I said, your reflex, it's going to take some time to build that up, right? But if you didn't know or didn't have some of that memorized, it's going to take you even longer to really process that, because then you're fighting an uphill battle on what is this weird word order? I don't know what's going on. And that's where reviewing the explanations at least once or getting those really important ideas memorized is going to help you. But remember, it's not a race. Grammar is slowly going to become more familiar and more comfortable over time. And like I said, it's not a rush. There's so many words you need to learn. There's a lot of listening comprehension to do. And slowly that grammar will be more comfortable, where you'll be able to communicate in the past tense or the future effortlessly when you speak, or you'll be able to listen to word order and process it naturally. That's kind of the way that I think about grammar, right? It's not an intense grammar focus, nor is it a complete absence of grammar. It's a nice middle of the road approach. Grammar doesn't have to be this really intimidating and horrible thing, right? Just take it in small bursts, right? Slowly incorporate that into your language learning process. And even though it's probably one of the least fun aspects of the language learning process, it really can help you to make a lot more gains in the end of the day and more fun, because you'll be able to enjoy the reading, the listening better, because you have a better foundation with understanding how your language works. So let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.